Hey, it's Max. Continuing the theme of new rolling stock, I've somehow managed to pull off the impossible and build a LEGO G-Class before the real trams enter service. Now, before you go up in arms, no, I have not quite finished it to my satisfaction, not least because I'm yet to design a livery, but also because when I was designing the latest version of it, I had almost no reference material to go off of for the smaller details. Although all in all, it's still an absolutely fantastic achievement. Not really related to this video, but something that I thought I should bring up. Why on earth is it called the G-Class? Come on guys, you're better than the 7th generation, 7th letter, 7000 PR bullshit. I've only written at least 4 scripts about that, with a heck of a lot more grievances I might add, but with that out of the way, let's get on with it. In all seriousness, in the 2019 Melbourne Rail Plan, there was mention of the 40 metre F-Class and 24 metre G-Class. I suppose that the F-Class was cancelled because that's what we have. Also, I have generally written pages upon pages about things wrong with the G-Class, for instance in numbering, although admittedly that's the E-Class's fault, but I've come to terms with it because the heck is going to change now. Hey, remember 4 sentences ago when I said latest version? Yeah, well, ever since the tram was originally announced back in April of 2022, I've been hard at work designing version after version, trying to keep up with the many publicly released design iterations of the real tram over the many months. What's really neat though is you can see how I've evolved over the last 2 years as a LEGO builder. So, let me rip off the band-aid and show you my horrendous first draft of the tram. Keep in mind, all I had to go off of were the few renders released to the public at the time. I believe that this first almost complete version is from around mid-2023, so over a year after the tram was announced, but still a good few months before the mock-up was revealed. As I had nothing but all of 6 renders to base the entire thing off of, I used the trams that I had designed at the time to help. That being my old B-Class, my low-floor B-Class, as well as something else that I'm still not ready to show yet. I can almost guarantee I barely use them though, since I usually plan out my dimensions with windows. Interestingly, I decided not to replicate the thinner window near to the cab, instead making it the same size as all of the other ones. I also built the walls completely flat, as opposed to the subtle curve along the renders, although considering that I had never successfully built trams with curved walls up to that point, I suppose it's not the most surprising thing. To make the bogies, I used what was cutting-edge technology for me at the time, but as with my low-floor B-Class, I won't go into detail because that's for another video. Although you can see that I hadn't developed my 5-stud gauge bogies at that point, let alone low-floor ones. For some reason, I decided to have a go at an interior, and weirdly opted for normal minifigure seats. My interior skills have certainly come a long way since then, as you will see. Bizarrely, the renders of the real tram didn't have a consistent pantograph between them. Sorry for not using technical terms, it bugs me too, but some of them used the bog standard double boom designs, while others used whatever you'd call the triangular ones. I personally think that the triangular pantograph makes anything look infinitely cooler, so I went with that one, even though I was expecting them to use the other design, as seen on the E-Class. And speaking of roof details, I ended up just chucking on some random black blocks with mild greebling. It's nothing special, and in hindsight actually looks really ugly. Despite the build being 8 studs wide, I decided to make the roof only 7. That would be because I used panels for the top trim, which in of itself is not the worst thing I could have done. Can I just say, why do the renders have a random black notch just behind the cab? I'm fine with recreating it, but come on, it just looks sloppy. I'm glad they fixed it on the final livery. Addressing the allegations, elephant in the room, I really struggled with the front windscreen, because there were really no good pieces to make curved windows in the scale I'm building in. Well, not back then at least. Considering the circumstances, I reckon I did an okay job. After that ugly thing, I left the G-Class for a number of months to work on other projects. I picked it up again around the 2-year anniversary of it being announced, and this time I came armed with pictures of the mock-up as reference material. A quick heads up, I'll be using a combination of Bricklink Studio and real life to illustrate some of my design choices, even when I'm not explaining the final design. I threw together the central segment using a similar design to my recently redesigned D-Classes. Yeah, I'll finish them one day, maybe. Anyway, my redesigned D-Classes came with 3 crucial features. Firstly, a full interior, which I decided to also do for my G-Class. Secondly, a full 100% low floor. And lastly, matching 100% low floor 5-stud gauge bogies, working as per the design requirements described in the second video on this channel. But that's for another time. For the G-Class, I also made the ramp up over the bogies, as seen on most modern 100% low floor trams. My D2 class's central segment is 10 studs long, whereas I needed my G-Classes to be 11 to fit in the central pillar between the 2 windows. Extending it out was surprisingly tedious, especially when it came to the interior, but I managed to make it work. But if I thought that was tedious... Cab. I don't have an actual figure, but I'm pretty sure the cab took me a number of days to put together. My saving grace came in the form of a piece in a new colour, of 3x3 macaroni in trans clear. I cannot express how useful this piece was, even if I would have preferred a 4x4 macaroni in trans clear or trans brown at the time. Even with that godsend, it was still very much an uphill struggle to get the rest of the cab looking decent. If the cab's windscreen was a complete semicircle, it would look somewhat ridiculous, so I put the macaroni bricks on a single stud connection and rotated the structure to a 45-degree angle. I then struggle bust my way through the top half of the cab, using friction toe balls to get a 3D angle on the top trim, a technique that I thought was pretty neat. I had a horrendous time trying to attach the side windows, and eventually stuck with what I had come up with originally. I had gone with an on-grid base for the cab, which didn't look great, but it looked. I think it was slightly redeemed with the curved slopes for the bumper. Slightly. I unceremoniously skipped over it for a good segue, but the rest of the outer segments are somewhat of a work of art in their own right. Getting the seating above the bogie and the floor to flow relatively seamlessly was a fun yet once again slightly tedious task, and the psychology pattern on the floor, as I like to call it, was a nice deviation from just one colour. 2 shades of grey for the price of an integration headache. Unlike my previous design, I came up with a way to make the thinner windows near the cab, once again inspired by my D-classes. It's not pure LEGO, but it doesn't modify any pieces permanently, unlike other sudden mocks of mine. In a similar vein, I attached the underside of a seat to the outside wall, and to stop the dark grey from bleeding too badly, I put yet another sticker on the outside of it. I used 1x1 tiles to emulate folded up, fold down seats, and to make the so-called best seat on the tram, which by the way I suspect has a shocking view, I used light bluish grey panels instead of the green that I'd used on all the other seats. That was about it for the second version of my G-Class, and I left it in a somewhat unfinished state until 2 months ago when 7 News covered a story on the tram, which I thought was very random at the time since the mock-up was approaching a year old at that point. The news story gave me a good excuse to finish the tram, and I began briefly experimenting with making it 7 wide, but concluded that it was mostly an issue with the cab rather than proportions. So I set about thinning the front cab. If anything, I went right from one extreme to the other, but I think that this new design works better than my old one. I also tidied up the 45-degree connection point. I fixed up the sides of the cab while I was at it, making it a much more cohesive design, even if I did have to lose the angle on the top trim. I absolutely love the way I recreated the gradual slope of the black line down to the non-existent headlights. It's quite possibly my favourite part of my tram because it's just so smooth. One element that gave me endless headaches was the top segment above the cab. Finding the right combination of pieces was probably the thing that took up the most time out of anything on the revision, and getting it to attach wasn't all that easy either. I ended up connecting it using a stud inverter to get a variable connection, which I needed to fill the approximately half to 3/4 plate gap behind it as best as possible. I left the front door unfinished on the old design because making 3 stud wide snot elements is extremely difficult. On my new design, I used a method inspired by my C1 class, yeah I'm dropping another one, which once again used stickers. I had a rethink of the seats above the bogies, and decided to cause myself endless pain by offsetting them half a plate to make them more accurate. It looks better, but at what cost? 60 jumper plates, that's what. A reference that I mostly overlooked last time I was working on the G-Class was a blueprint that was on an informational sheet at the G-Class mock-up. It comes with dimensions and a front view and everything, brilliant for my needs and helped wonders with the cab, but it also helped with something else, the roof. There were, and at the time of writing still are, literally no good references of the roof on the whole internet, not a single picture or anything, which is why I didn't bother with one on my previous design. However, the blueprint had a bit peeking up over the top, and I designed a roof entirely based on that. It's certainly not accurate in the slightest, but it's something for the time being, and I don't think it looks half bad. Oh yeah, and my prediction about getting the pantograph wrong on my old design was correct. While fact-checking some stuff for this video, I rediscovered an official render of the tram in profile, similar to the blueprint, which had a much more detailed roof. This would have helped greatly with my roof, even if I wouldn't classify it as a good reference, because it still doesn't show the full thing by any means. I'm not going to redesign my roof until I have actual pictures of the real thing to work off of though. And with the roof complete, I was just about done with the tram. Conveniently, I was planning on getting my Z-Class and one other tram last month, and so it was the perfect opportunity to get my G-Class. But before I got anything, I had some issues to try and fix. Firstly, I came up with a few variants of the cab. There's subtle differences and I wasn't set on one at the time, so I decided to provision for all of them when I was ordering the parts. By the way, this orange bit is meant to represent the bottom PID on the cab. Something else that I attempted to fix was its lack of curviness. Like my original G-Class, my new design had a case of the flat wall, with the exception of a row of curves on the roof to ease it off slightly. I came up with a potential idea to add a slight angle to the bottom of the tram to emulate the curve, and if I got it to work, it would quite possibly be the best thing I've ever designed, and the most complicated. Spoiler alert, after a week and a half straight of trying just about everything under the sun, I could not come up with a stable way to make it work between all the segments. I managed to come up with a decent way to merge the curve at the cab and split the doors. However, I then had to choose between a lovely interior or an absolute mess of bricks, and I chose the former when I eventually ordered it. I'd put off ordering it for well over a week now in case I made a breakthrough or something. And while tinkering with the taper, I had a double take at that news story that had gotten me started on the revision in the first place. Until this time, I was working under the assumption that the mockup was the latest thing I could base my G-Class off of. And why wouldn't I? There'd be no news of anything new to my knowledge, and oh wait, news? Yep, that's right, quite literally right under my nose this whole time in the 7 news story is what I believe to be footage of an updated G-Class mockup that I can only assume is approaching the final design. It's hardly my fault for not clocking it though. They'd spliced it in so heavily with footage of the older mockup design that I had no reason to assume anything was up. To be expected, a lot of the mockup had changed in the final design, with one of the key differences being the exclusion of the psychology pattern floor, which was honestly quite saddening. Another important thing that I only became aware of when I saw it and failed to capture on my design was the raised low floor. Bear with me. On the E-Class, there are some quite stubborn ramps up from platform height to its floor height. They were one of the main criticisms when they were first introduced, but were necessary for the low floor to be continuous. The G-Class has a very similar design. However, because the mockup was originally at a makeshift platform, it was harder to make out until now. Needless to say, by the time this shocking revelation had come through to me, I'd had enough and decided to stick with my design based on the original mockup. I'd been holding off buying it for multiple weeks now and was burnt out, so I went ahead and ordered the parts. One quick build later, and here it is. I don't like making promises anymore, but next week I'll release the customary speed build of it. So now that I have it in real life, what of it? Firstly, I absolutely love it of course, but the next step is designing a livery for it and filming it next to the real thing. The one flaw in that plan is the real thing currently isn't on the network, and likely won't be in service until well into 2025 or even 2026 if things go badly, so that video's a ways off. And as for the livery, well, it's going to be an absolute pain to apply around the top of the cab. I mean, why do they have to be so harsh on me? Why couldn't it have been like other trams? Oh well, maybe I'll just not do it around there. One very last thing I need to figure out is how to make concertinas for it. I'm almost certainly not going to make them with Lego, because it's an absolute pain to do so, and doesn't look that good, and I'm aware of many other different ways to do it using all sorts of materials. However, I'm still working out what's best for my tram box. If you have any suggestions that's not badly folding paper, please let me know. Hopefully by the time I make the showcase video, I will have been able to redesign the interior to the updated design, create the roof, and find an adequate concertina design. That blueprint from earlier in the video actually holds more secrets than just the roof. In fact, I've cut out over half of the image for this video, and also removed some things from the studio files I've shown to keep it under wraps, but that's for another time. If you made it this far into the video, why not subscribe or even chuck a membership in? Thanks to Jay for your support. A huge thanks to Philip Malice for letting me use his pictures of the mockup, and to Tazzy for providing other pictures. Thanks for watching, see you next time.